On Caster Semenya, still developments today in her victory at the European Court of Human Rights, which says she was unfairly discriminated against the International Amateur Athletics Federation, now known as World Athletics. Professor Steve Cornelius was a member of the association's disciplinary tribunal. He resigned from the organization because of the way Caster was being treated. He's still, of course, a professor at the law faculty at the University of Pretoria. Professor, good afternoon to you. I'm sure, like everyone, you see this as a vindication for Caster.
Good afternoon. Yes, it is. It's a step in the right direction. It's perhaps not yet the final word, and I think also one has to understand the context of this ruling. It's not actually against World Athletics. It's a ruling against the Swiss government and indicating that the Swiss legal system failed her in her appeal from the Court of Arbitration of Sport to the Swiss Federal Tribunal. So it's a bit of a complicated matter, but I think for all of us involved in the process from the beginning, it is at least, perhaps not quite a vindication yet, but at least a very positive indication. And I think the first time also that some of the arguments we presented that were ignored by World Athletics and the Court of Arbitration for Sport have actually now been upheld. So yes, it's a good sign.
The fact World Athletics says that their current rules will not change as a result of this decision, I'm not a lawyer, but I don't know how to read that. It seems to me bizarre that that a group of judges can rule against you and you don't change anything.
Yeah, as I say, I think the important thing is to understand how the European human rights system works. It's not the same as our constitutional court where the court rules and the parties are bound to it. The appeal to the to the European Court of Human Rights was not against World Athletics or the Court of Arbitration for Sport. It was actually against Switzerland, and the argument was that by denying the appeal that she brought to the Swiss, the highest courts in Switzerland, when that appeal was denied, in effect, Switzerland as a state denied her human rights. So the ruling is actually now against Switzerland. So the process must probably now be to, if this is not appealed, and it's again not up to World Athletics to appeal this. I see they have urged the Swiss government to lodge an appeal because there's one higher body in the European system, the Grand Chamber. But if the Swiss government would decide to abide by this, it means that the matter would have to be taken back to the Swiss court, and the Swiss court would then have to make a ruling which could be binding on World Athletics, or at least on the Court of Arbitration for Sport. So that's why I hesitate to say it's a vindication for Caster Semenya or anybody involved, but it's certainly a very positive step, and at least it recognizes the arguments that we all have been presenting from the outset.
As I understand it, the Court for Arbitration for Sport was set up in Switzerland sort of, deliberately to deal with some of the complicated matters that sport kicks up from time to time. Sport, of course, is a reflection of society. No matter what anyone says, it's always about what's really going on in society, and that's one of the reasons it's so interesting. So it seems to me, again, not a lawyer, but this is a nonsensical way to deal with things. If I was Caster Semenya, I would actually think this has taken too long. There are too many people. There are now people in a foreign country who have nothing to do with sport. I'm talking about the Swiss government now, who agreed to host it. And I mean, in a way, well done to them for agreeing to host it. So they might be a bit frustrated by it. But there are a group of people in a country far away, don't know me, don't know anything about this at all, making decisions based on rules that are drawn up by someone else. There's got to be a better way for sport to deal with this, surely.
Yes, in a sense. It is complicated because one of the reasons why the Court of Arbitration for Sport was set up, and then obviously it's based in Switzerland, in Lausanne, because the International Olympic Committee is based there. But the primary reason why it was set up is that there was a risk at some stage, especially in the 1970s, 1980s, where national courts would overturn decisions of international sports federations, and you would get two different national courts in different jurisdictions giving different results. So the one problem was that there was a real risk that there would not be consistency in the rulings, and also in some instances, some countries didn't even provide for review of decisions by sports federations. So it was actually to provide some consistency and some stability that people involved in sport who understand matters would be the final decision makers. Now, the one important thing that does come out, and I must say I haven't read the entire judgment yet because it's in French, and my French is very rusty, so it's going to take me a while to go through that. But one of the things that came up is that the European Court for Human Rights really indicated that they expected a higher standard of looking at things from the Court of Arbitration for Sport, and by this, or the Swiss Federal Tribunal, for not looking at that and also expecting them to really look at things much more in depth and not ignoring the human rights arguments and the arguments that were put forward on the European Convention on Human Rights. That certainly imposes on them. And going forward, maybe in this case, already, so much time, it's 5 years since we started. So a lot of time has gone by. It's probably never going to help Caster Semenya much, but certainly for people coming after her, it will make a difference eventually.
World Athletics released a statement today. I'll read part of it to you. They say, "We remain of the view that the DSD regulations are a necessary, reasonable and proportionate means of protecting fair competition in the female category." There's not a word there about how they feel in terms of, losing this and what it's done to Caster's life. But how do you feel when they say it's a proportionate means of protecting the female category? There's a very complicated issue developing here.
Yeah, but I think, and our argument has always been that when it comes to discrimination, the proportionality element is obviously important. We've always argued that it is completely disproportionate, especially the fact that one takes healthy individuals and now put them on medical treatment, which is not medically prescribed. So that has always for us been an argument that makes it disproportionate. The one thing that the the European Court for Human Rights now emphasized, and why they found that the Swiss Federal Tribunal was wrong in not upholding a appeal, is the fact that the court said when it comes to gender issues, the proportionality argument must be very compelling. And it did not find that there were sufficient compelling reasons to actually uphold these regulations, especially taking into account the other argument which the Court of Arbitration for Sport never really paid attention to, and that is Section 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights, which actually in the Civil Code of Monaco, where the World Athletics is based, is repeated word for word exactly the same. Is the issue of respect for family life and privacy. And in a number of cases, the European Court for Human Rights has held that any form of medical treatment that is not with the consent of the patient, and which is basically, in a sense, coerced consent, is not allowed in the European system. And similarly, I can't see that a court in South Africa would uphold it. So I do think there's a lot to think about. The big question now is whether the Swiss government, because only the Swiss government can appeal against this, World Athletics cannot. So they will certainly try to exert their influence, if they have any, on the Swiss authorities. But in the end, it's whether the Swiss authorities have an appetite to appeal.
Professor, thank you. Professor Steve Cornelius, a former member, of course, of the Disciplinary Tribunal of the organization that's now World Athletics, still, of course, a law professor at the University of Pretoria.